liberty and unity. O sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
Shining through the African continent, AAU, voice of higher education, revitalizing higher education in Africa. Human resources are greatest assets, transforming Africa's education. We espouse with virtues and scholarship, we research with joy. We facilitate teaching and learning in all disciplines and courses, transforming Africa's education. AAU, the hub of excellence, shaping Africa's educational thoughts. AAU, spring of talents, web of passion, amazing. Innovation, upholding quality, equity, and standards, transforming Africa's education. We espouse with virtues and scholarship, we research with joy, dignity and truth, we facilitate teaching and learning in all disciplines and courses. AAU, the pillar of higher learning, spearheading Africa's development. AAU, one of friendship, noble fellows, pushing partnership for higher education. Africa's intellectual advancement are focused to achieve African liberals. We espouse with virtues and scholarship, we research with joy, dignity and truth, we facilitate teaching and learning in all disciplines and courses, transforming Africa's education.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Honorable Minister of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Ita Kanji-Murangi. The President of the Association of African Universities, Prof. Bakri. Honorable Speaker of Parliament, Professor Peter Kachavivi. Honorable former Minister of Education and also former Prime Minister, Honorable Nasa Ngula. The Secretary General of the Association of African Universities and the first Vice President of the Association of African Universities, Prof. Kenji. The different executive directors here present, my fellow Vice Chancellors, Chief Executive Officers of state and private-owned enterprises, members of the diplomatic corps, our distinguished guests from China, from Latin America and Europe, distinguished academics, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure this morning to do a few welcoming remarks, which I'm going to do in a rather unusual way, in that I will make a statement as a geographer. So I'll show a lot of maps today. I will start by just asking the question. The theme of this conference, as you know, is advancing excellency in higher education in Africa. And I'm asking, why is this important? In asking this question, I would like to show you several reasons why this is important. First, in terms of world mapper data, Africa's production of research is relatively weak. If you look at this, you would see Africa is more or less like a malnourished child who has been suffering from kwashiorkor and other things. And we have to think about why is this the case? If you compare to research productivity in other continents, it is quite high, and Africa is relatively weak. There are many reasons why this is the case, and I don't intend to answer this question. I just want to raise this as a question that may be interrogated as we move on. The second thing is that part of what we know as an enabler to learning is access to power, in such a way that people are able to read and prepare themselves anytime they want. And access to electricity in homes in Africa, as you can see there, is weak. What it means is that people only have access are able to only study when they are in institutions of learning, whether it is in school or in universities, but not at home. And part of this reason is, as you may have seen some data from other sources, is that African learners and students stay relatively lower numbers of hours in school. Whereas in some places, students would be from 8 to 5. In Africa, that number is much, much lower, is maybe from 7:30 to 1. And it affects how education is conducted in its results. Second, the third thing is that the percentage of Africans who can read compared to the world average is much lower than the world average. The world average is 86% of literacy. And in most African countries, as you can see there, is lower than average. Here, I would just like to clarify, you may say, why is Martin concerned about literacy? We are higher education, we are not responsible for basic education. In my opinion, we are. We produce the teachers who teach in basic education. And so it is important for us that we think about what is going on and what we're going to do about that. Because we have got to cause development and cause the interest that we want to see in higher education, in basic, and see education as a system. How is Africa doing as far as ranking is concerned? Again, you can see that the percentage of universities that are ranked in Africa is relatively low. And there are many reasons around this. I know there's controversy about the process of ranking itself and the business interests of the publishers and many other things. But this is the reality as far as ranking is concerned. Africa is not doing well. There is some sort of relation between ranking and the economy and access to electricity. If you take more or less any satellite image around 11 or 12 or 2 o'clock in the morning, the world will look like this. If you compare the institutions that are ranked and where energy is, you see a relationship, isn't it? You see where most of the universities are ranked and its relation to economy, the strength of the economy, as well as access to electricity. Most of Africa is relatively dark. Why is this? Then, what is the impact of research on hunger and vulnerability? You can also see two things you can observe in this map is that Africa, the percentage of people who have extreme vulnerability to hunger is very high in Africa. Where it shows no data is not necessarily that there isn't data. It is because people there are not vulnerable to hunger and other aspects. And again, it is summoning higher education If we have the best brains, what can we do about this? The average of income to people in extreme poverty. Again, you can see there are questions of how do we allocate resources and how is this impacting on the level of income. Basically, the thing here is that if you raise the middle class, you are attacking poverty. If you have a high number of low class and higher class, you have a huge population in between that is vulnerable and marginal in terms of what you could do in terms of poverty. According to data, in the next 3 generations, Africa will make up 41% of the world's youth. Africa has what, 1.7 to close to 2 billion people. And the majority of that are youth. As far as I've seen, it is around about 800 million who are youth in Africa. And how are we preparing them to make sure that they get into education? So we know that the percentage of Africans in education compared to the rest of the world is still very low. And here I must tell you some interesting statistics. In that out of the 54, depending what you consider, maybe 55 African countries, the gross tertiary enrollment in higher education is around about 9.4%, which is below the global average of 38%. It tells you that there is something that is happening that is either hindering or not empowering people to get into higher education. Overall, the spending per region is 21% of government and education expenditure on tertiary education compared to 27% on secondary education and 43% on primary education. Basically, the majority of funding in higher education in Africa is going to basic education, less so to secondary and to higher education. Across the continent, approximately 9 million students are enrolled in tertiary education sector, which is 3% of the total enrollment. Now, if you think about the number of Africans that are not in higher education compared to the rest of the world, you can see there that, again, is a huge number of people who do not access higher education for various reasons: funding, infrastructure, capacity, and so on. You can twist this and get a different map that shows you the number of people who do not access higher, who do not complete higher basic secondary school. That is also a very interesting picture you would get. In the interest of time, I didn't include this map, but it will give you a perspective of what actually is happening in African education. Has Africa contributed to Nobel laureates? Does anyone know one? There are some, but there are some in Egypt and several other places, but you can see there that, again, the contribution of Africa as a continent to Nobel laureates is very, very low. Actual enrollment in higher education, you can see there across the other regions. Sub-Saharan Africa is on the bottom. Even in Middle East and North Africa is not doing that well. Question is why? In terms of the percentage of those enrolled in higher education compared to total enrollment per country, you will see there that there is also very interesting statistics that we can interpret in different ways. Again, is this something that is telling us about the quality of education, the hindrances to access, how it is funded, the norms and standards that should be in place. How about spending? Is that the big question? As I've indicated earlier, the majority of the funds goes to basic education, followed by secondary education, and what remains is what goes to higher education. And you can compare this map to ranking, to the economy, to research productivity. You can see the relations. Therefore, advancing excellency in higher education is important. And this is why the 6 themes of this conference are strategic. There are some good things that are happening in other African countries. That is why you see that small cloud in the end of the map of something that is happening in Africa, which we must share. That is good practice. It's something that is happening there which we are not sharing. We need to share more. Part of this is what to do about doctoral education. I have seen figures. The world estimate is that around about 100 million people by 2030 would be doing their PhDs in universities. That figure is expected to increase to about 600 million in 2065. The question is, how much of those would be Africans and studying in Africa? And it begs the question of how many centers of African studies do you find in Africa? You find many of them outside Africa, but not in Africa itself. Or let's say, how many do we have centers of European or Asian studies in Africa? We don't find this. But doctoral education and postdoctoral education are key ways of resolving the issues that you see in the maps that I've indicated. Then there's a question of the unique programs, which in the theme we are talking of institutional differentiation. The uniqueness of the program that speaks to the continental endowments. How many countries have institutions that speaks to the natural resources that they have? The so-called, what we call in geography as sectoral development planning, where you have institutions that speaks to the sector of your endowment. If you have uranium, do you have a uranium institute? The second thing about institutional differentiation is that we see a lot of private sector massification in Africa, private institutions, which is a good thing because they diversify access to education. But if there are no norms and standards of when can you say this is a university, this is a college, this is a polytechnic, or whatever it is, if those norms and standards are not there, you have a very serious problem. South-South collaboration and partnership should be increased because we can see that if the South-South cooperation increases in the way it operates, we are able to do much better work to increase the continent's capabilities and endowments. And in this theme here, it is called partnerships and networking. And it is something that we need to really look into. The role of industry. A couple of years ago, the Association of African Universities conducted a study, and there were less than 17% of universities that had industry, university linkages, or technology transfer offices, where you are ensuring that the industry is in constant communication with the academia and ensuring that what is being researched upon speaks to the needs of the industry, and the industry is able to communicate its needs to higher education. That is a weak element and which needs to be moved. And I believe Africa must be able to move away from a technology consumer to a technology producer. After all, many of the technologies that are produced, the basic resources are shipped and mined from Africa. There's an appeal to the diaspora to play their part. I don't dare to say the figures, but I do know how many Africans are in certain continents who are serving in academia there. Very, very large numbers. And we need to be ensuring that an enabling environment is created for this diaspora to play their role in the continent. And a pragmatic commitment to financing research and development, student and staff mobility is so important. Because if that is not happening, the institutions are disabled from sharing best practices, from creating these global citizens that we desire. Can we do this? It's our 6 themes of the conference. I think we can. I just want to give you some examples of how we interpret advancement of advancing excellency in higher education in Namibia. This is UNAM's own assessment using Skyval databases of our contribution to the SDGs. I'm not going to spend more time on this, but you can see in each of the SDGs, we are measuring as a university our contribution to each of the SDGs. And this is important because it is speaking to our relevance and our responsiveness as a higher education institution. And you can make a comparison in terms of how we compare to the world, to Namibia as a whole, as a university, and you can see how we have done. One of the problems I indicated earlier in terms of the map is hunger, or you could put it as food insecurity. So together with the agronomic board, we have been undertaking some studies to check the 3 things: the yield, use of water, resistance to pests, as well as the tonnage per hectare. And what you see there, the red are the best seeds in the country, the best performing seeds on white maize, and the rest of the blue are the varieties that the University of Namibia has tested in the last 2 years. And you can see that you can double in terms of tonnage. And we have taken this example because we know that Namibia is a net importer of cereals. And so with the database of the agronomic board, we are checking which of the seeds and crops and cereals is Namibia importing the most, and we work towards creating a seed production facility for the country so that we are not dependent. The Namibians would know that in 2017, 2018, there was a crisis. We couldn't get seeds. We had to get them, I think, from Indonesia or so for farmers to plant. Therefore, as a university, an exemplar or type of our resilience in terms of our quality of our education is self-sustainability. On COVID, we all know, the whole continent, we were caught off guard. But as a university, we trained sniffer dogs for COVID-19. What they do is very simple. You take a swab in your armpit, they sniff it, in seconds they will tell whether you're positive or negative. 100% success with negative samples, and 90% success with positive samples. And to confirm this, we use the patients in the hospitals. And sometimes on the negative samples, okay, let me put it this way. Sometimes the dogs would indicate that the person is positive, but is not. There is another reason to that, because there's a certain hormone which I'm not going to talk about, which is very close to fertility, which the dogs are able to detect, but if you are not doing extra tests to be able to confirm, you may mistake the patient as being, to put it bluntly, it is ovulation. But this has been a very significant innovation in that we are able to deploy these dogs if you have a big event, the dogs will help very quick, rather than having to wait and spend money on the samples. To conclude, Africa's development will rise and fall depending on the quality of excellency of its higher education system, which would be influenced by the continental standards, the questions about harmonization of education, the quality assurance processes. The norms and principles is what will determine whether this African we want to build is achieved. And I want to conclude by saying what we know, we must share. And what we don't know, we must ask. I thank you very much. Welcome.
Your Excellency, the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Namibia, Professor Matengu, the President of the Association of African Universities, Professor Bakri, please permit me to rest on the already laid protocol for this occasion. I want to thank Professor Matengu for posing that question, which I believe that throughout this conference will be answered. Why should we promote excellence in African higher education? I want to thank you for the great work you've been doing in Namibia, and I'm glad that all of us present here were happy to be in this place at this time. My call at this very time is to, on behalf of the Association of African Universities, to welcome all our distinguished participants at this 22nd Conference of Rectors, Vice Chancellors, and Presidents of African Universities. Over the past decades, African higher education has witnessed a remarkable surge, creating unprecedented opportunities for millions of students and fostering social and economic progress on national, continental, and global scales. Despite this notable growth, it is essential to acknowledge that the sector still faces challenges in key areas, necessitating a concerted effort to further expand, for instance, access and quality. This expansion, however, brings to the fore a myriad of pressing issues, particularly pertaining to quality and excellence. Despite significant financial investment, the sector continues to face formidable financial challenges, impacting every facet of higher education landscape. Consequently, the narrative surrounding higher education as predominantly cast in a deficit mode. Quite often when people talk about Africa, they talk about the negatives, highlighting crises and shortcomings. This prevailing perspective has perpetuated discussions that primarily focus on challenges, overshadowing the remarkable achievements attained thus far and diminishing the prospects for success and excellence within the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, amidst these challenges and issues, there are pockets of excellence that have emerged within the African continent, predominantly at institutional, departmental, and even national levels, offering valuable insights, experiences, and perspectives on how these entities have not only overcome, but thrived within the continent. I believe that in the next few days, we'll be sharing this with ourselves. Our gathering today, within this week, It's an opportunity for us to learn from each other, to share best practices, to promote partnership and collaboration among ourselves. With this in mind, this 22nd COREVIP endeavors to place a sharp focus on excellence, successful initiatives within the African continent, interventions and outcomes in African higher education. I believe that in the next few days, through robust dialogues, rigorous analysis, and fruitful exchanges, we aspire to advance institutional differentiation, recalibrate institutional missions, reimagine delivery modalities, and promote internationalization. We hope that we want to see how we can foster university-industry linkages, address funding challenges, and harness the untapped potentials of our intellectual diaspora. I believe that we've all come to this conference with a renewed commitment to work towards strengthening our association, the Association of African Universities, and the African higher education in general. Ladies and gentlemen, let us leverage the networking platforms and key opportunities availed to us through our participation in this conference for the good of our institutions, of our students, and other stakeholders. I take this opportunity to invite all of us to please take time to visit the exhibitions around us. I want to especially seize this opportunity to recognize the presence of delegates from the Latin American countries and the Republic of China, as well as numerous participants from outside the African continent, whose presence is as a result of AAU's commitment to foster collaboration within and outside Africa. I want to thank many of us from the Latin America who received me openly, and without hesitation agreed to be at this particular conference. You are all welcome. I express the appreciation of the Association of African Universities to the European Union and Aqua 3 implementation team comprised of Obrecht Global, the Association of African Universities, the German Academic Exchange Service, DAD, the European Quality Assurance Network, ENQA, for their decision to launch this new program here at this particular conference. Ladies and gentlemen, one other important event that will be taking place during this conference is the launch of the African Charter for Transformative Research Collaborations, which is being co-created by the University of Bristol and the key higher education and research bodies and constituencies in Africa. This charter sets us key principles and aspirations for change to foster transformative research collaborations with the continent that will serve to advance a more just and richer and better scientific collaboration between all of us. I will not end this welcome statement without appreciating all our partners and all who have contributed themselves to sponsoring some sessions of this conference. I want to personally appreciate the board of AAU, led by Professor Bakri, for giving me a free hand to be innovative in the running of AAU. Permit me to welcome all of us to this conference. Enjoy your stay in Namibia. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Minister of Higher Education, Innovation and Technology, Excellencies, distinguished guests from China, from Latin America, from Africa, my colleagues, rectors, vice chancellors, and presidents of African universities, my fellow academics, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the media, dear participants. It is with great pleasure that I extend my warmest welcome to each and every one of you at this prestigious 22nd Conference of Rectors, Vice Chancellors, and Presidents of African Universities. We were deprived of this occasion due to COVID, so the previous meeting was online, so I am very glad to again look at all these shining faces in this room. On this occasion, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our members, esteemed partners, and all stakeholders for your unwavering support towards the Association of African Universities as we diligently fulfill our core mandate of transforming Africa's higher education sector. The gathering of key stakeholders in Africa's higher education for purposeful deliberations is of paramount importance, and COREVIP stands as a unique platform precisely designed for such engaging education. The 2023 COREVIP centers its focus on excellence, spotlighting successful initiatives and remarkable outcomes within the African higher education landscape. Moreover, the conference will delve into critical sub-themes such as doctoral education, institutional differentiation, university-industry linkages, and funding and financing, which all serve as vital enablers in fostering sustainable progress. We firmly believe that the diverse range of sessions and interactive dialogues, while shedding light on the challenges faced, will most importantly present viable and sustainable solutions in the aforementioned areas. It is through these profound discussions that we can collectively propel the advancement of African higher education and pave the way for a brighter future. I also extend our profound appreciation to the University of Namibia and its outstanding Vice Chancellor, Professor Matsengo, for graciously hosting this 22nd COREVIP conference and for their invaluable support in ensuring its seamless organization. And our gratefulness extends to the government of Namibia and the people of this great country. Our heartfelt gratitude also goes to all our esteemed partners whose commitment has transformed this conference into a remarkable reality. We are hopeful that the conference proceedings and the resulting recommendations will serve as a catalyst, propelling us towards the realization of our shared vision for African higher education growth and development, ultimately shaping the Africa we want. Once again, I extend my sincerest welcome to all distinguished participants, and I'm eagerly looking forward to the fruitful engagement and meaningful collaboration that lie ahead of us all. But before I go, because in events like this, a lot of people who will be working behind the scenes and bosses like me end up getting the credit for work which they didn't do. So I would like to recognize and thank all my colleagues and employees at the Secretariat of the Association of African Universities for what they have done for the organization of this meeting under the able guidance of our Secretary General, because this really reflects their passion and commitment to this organization and its missions. I wish you a fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Honorable Professor Peter Kashavivi, Speaker of the National Assembly and founding Vice Chancellor of the University of Namibia. Honorable Nahas Angula, our former Prime Minister and founding Minister of Education in the Republic of Namibia. Honorable ministers present, Professor Said Bakri Osman, President of the Association of African Universities, Professor Matengu, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Namibia and President of the Pan-African University, Professor Olusola Bandele Oyewole, Secretary General of the AAU, board members of the AAU, rectors, vice-chancellors, and presidents of African universities, delegates, invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a great honor to welcome you all on behalf of the government of the Republic of Namibia and to provide a synopsis of the higher education development in Namibia at this high-profile conference themed Advancing Excellence in African Higher Education. I strongly believe that the deliberations and outcome of this conference will have significant impact on the African education system. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, and I quote, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively, and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education," unquote. Namibia is honored to have been chosen through our premier university, UNAM, to host the 23rd 2023 Association of African Universities Conference of Vice-Chancellors, Rectors, and Presidents of African Universities. Nations' higher education systems are the seeds of knowledge creation, skills development, new inventions through research and innovation, and through appropriately harnessing new emerging technologies. It is not a sheer coincidence that Africa's universities leadership is converging here in Windhoek, Namibia, at a time when humanity and the world need urgent answers to rising geopolitical tensions, rapid adverse effects of climate change, how best to embrace the fourth and fifth industrial revolution in the face of the pros and cons of AI, and in the face of the problem of youth unemployment, and in particular, graduates unemployment. Some of the challenges are, of course, human trafficking, drug abuse, and issues of inequality. I can go on and on. The African Agenda 2063 strategies on education dovetail to the Global Education 2030 program that contributes to the achievement of Goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals that calls for inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. The Continental Education Strategy for Africa calls for the paradigm shift towards transformative education and training systems to meet the knowledge, competencies, skills, research, innovation, and creativity required to nurture the African core values and promote sustainable development. It is in this context that I would like to position my brief presentation on the overview of the development of higher education in our country. As you might be aware, education in Namibia before independence was under the control of the South African colonial government, with deliberate policies not to develop higher education. Namibians before independence, in accessing higher education, had to study at South African universities or internationally. Suffice to say, in the mid and late 80s, the South African colonial government set up three main tertiary institutions, namely the academy, teacher education colleges, and agricultural colleges. Albeit these institutions were established seemingly to provide access to tertiary education. However, access was extremely limited. For example, in 1989, only 3,443 Namibians had access to tertiary education in Namibia. It was against this backdrop that an education system for Namibia was conceived in exile to be implemented at independence in 1990. The University of Namibia was the forerunner of all the public tertiary institutions in Namibia, and it was founded by an Act of Parliament, Act 18 of 1992, following the recommendation of the 1991 Presidential Commission on Higher Education. This was followed by a promulgation of Act 33 of 1994 that founded the Polytechnic of Namibia and was repealed by the Namibia University of Science and Technology Act number 7 of 2015. To date, there are 3 public higher education institutions that include 2 public universities and 1 public college, namely the Namibia College of Open Learning, and approximately 16 registered private higher education institutions in our republic. From inception, the University of Namibia Act made provision for the institution to self-regulate in terms of quality assurance, approval, and accreditation of programs. However, the Higher Education Act, number 26 of 2003, provided for the establishment of the National Council for Higher Education. In terms of this act, NCHE was mandated to regulate higher education, accredit programs, register and deregister private higher education institutions. In addition, to provide a funding formula of public higher education institutions. Moreover, in addition to NCHE as a regulator, there are professional bodies that regulate professional programs, such as the Engineering Council of Namibia, Health Professional Councils of Namibia, Institute for Chartered Accountants, and the Law Society of Namibia. Esteemed delegates, the higher education system in Namibia is well regulated by several legal frameworks, namely the Higher Education Act, number 26 of 2003, with the mandate as alluded to earlier, Namibia Qualifications Authority, Act number 29 of 1996, to provide a national qualification framework for registration of qualifications and accreditation of institutions. Vocational Education and Training Act, number 1 of 2008, to regulate the provisions of vocational education and training and provide for the funding for vocational education and training. Namibia Student Financial Assistance Fund, Act number 26 of 2000, to provide financial assistance to eligible students at approved institutions of higher learning. Research, Science and Technology Act, number 23 of 2004, to provide for the promotion, coordination, and development of research, science, and technology in Namibia, and to establish a National Commission on Research, Science, and Technology, and the Fund for Research, Science, and Technology. As Nelson Mandela once said, and I quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which can be used to change the world," unquote. A lot has been achieved since independence in terms of access to higher education. As already stated, in 1989, for example, the student enrollment at the academy was 4,786, which included distance students. In 2021, according to the National Council on Higher Education report, the enrollment figures stood at 68,932. Despite the significant increase in student numbers, higher education institutions in Namibia face numerous challenges with regards to access, as not all aspiring students who seek admission to institutions of higher learning are admitted due to space limitations and limited students' funding. Further, another challenge is disparities in academic achievements between female and male students. Since the attainment of independence, more female students have been graduating in most of the disciplines nationally. The latest data show that in 2021, of the 10,108 graduates, 7,212 were female students, compared to 2,816 who were male, which translates to 71.3% for females and 28.7% for male graduates. Investment in education, including higher education, has been a priority for the Namibian government since independence in 1990. For instance, in the 2023-24 national budget, 16.8 billion Namibian dollars was allocated to the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, and 3.8 billion Namibian dollars was allocated to higher education, technology, and innovation. This translates to 28.4% allocated to the education sector, which equates to 9.6% of GDP, making Namibia one of the countries with the highest expenditure on education in the world. Despite the huge investment in education, access and equity and other imperatives of quality and excellence in higher education, such as sustained student experiences, infrastructure, and equipment for research and innovation, remain impediments to achieve desired outcomes. Referring to Namibian President, Dr. Hage Geingob, he said, "Education is the foundation for a prosperous nation. It is through education that we build a knowledgeable society capable of overcoming challenges and embracing opportunities," unquote. In conclusion, esteemed delegates, despite the high investment in education, access with equity is still a challenge in higher education. Funding to meet the demand for quality and equitable higher education in Namibia still need attention in our quest to respond to the required skills for the future workforce in this digital era. That is why this conference has come at an opportune time to share international experiences, forge linkages and collaboration as we interrogate challenges that confront the African higher education systems, with a view to achieve relevance, responsiveness, and excellence. Namibia is a product of international solidarity, and we look forward to attracting international students, as well as responding to SADC protocol on education and training in student and staff mobility, as well as joint research. With these remarks, I trust I have given you an appreciation of the Namibian education system. I now have a singular honor to declare this conference officially opened, and I thank you.